150 Chinese workers bound for salmon canneries at Blaine, Washington, leave Seattle on April 2nd, 1900. This is by Margaret Riddle from HistoryLink.org. For centuries, regional Native American tribes enjoyed an abundance of fish, which they used for food and trade. Eventually, the Europeans arrived and they wanted to exploit all of the natural resources. Gold was first, and then came silver, land, trees, and of course, fish. They needed to recruit young Asian immigrants to work in these fisheries and eventually the canneries. First from China in the 1860s and 70s, later from Japan and the Philippines. These people were recruited by labor contractors who were also Asian. I forgot they built railroads too. So they did much of the hard work of building the West and the Pacific Northwest. One good result of all this backbreaking labor for Seattle is that Seattle was kind of the hub and stopover point and return point for all these salmon and fishery workers, especially those going back and forth to Alaska. And that has resulted in a very diverse population here in Seattle with very strong Chinese, Japanese, and Filipino communities. A bunch of these canneries were on the Columbia River, which divides Oregon and Washington. The Hume Brothers Cannery, established in 1866, you got to remember, New York City was a bustling city of millions at this time. There were not a lot of Europeans in this area in 1866. They were the first to hire Chinese in the early 1870s. They supplemented their already diverse crew with 15 Chinese workers, 2 tinsmiths, a cook, and a dozen cleaners and packers. The Chinese workers proved dependable, and within the next decade, 3,000 of them were employed in a dozen plants on the Columbia River. Astoria, Oregon, also plants in Seattle, Bellingham, Fairhaven. Just really, I always thought a neighborhood right next to Bellingham. Anacortes, the San Juan Islands, and then, of course, British Columbia and Alaska. Globalization. When you put up tinned fish, it's preserved and you can ship it all over the world. And, of course, the U.S. Exclusion Act of 1882 barred new Chinese immigrants from entering the country. Anti-Chinese sentiment erupted in riots in 1886. Hundreds of Chinese were forced to leave Seattle and deported from Tacoma. Sad. So, again, a Chinese community formed in the Seattle waterfront and what is now Seattle's Chinatown International District. So always my favorite neighborhood. Chun Ching Hock and Chin Gi He, immigrants from southern China, were early Seattle-based labor contractors. So, there are these middlemen who are contacting people back home in China and saying, do you want the shittiest job imaginable, working 14 hours a day gutting fish? Well, come on over. So immigration, which is frowned upon by our current administration, swelled up until World War I. That's really a dark period, World War I. Mechanized capitalist war and stomping out communism became the thing, and it still is. So the population of cities exploded, including Seattle. In the April 1805 issue of Pacific Fisherman, it said there were 139 canneries in Puget Sound and Alaska. Meanwhile, the natives, this was their resource, of course, that everyone else is now, capitalizing and fighting over. They had been fishing for millennia with nets, weirs, channels, and platforms. Of course, the Europeans brought the concept of canning, tinned fish, still a huge thing, although not as big now, especially since all the salmon runs kind of were decimated and have died out in the previous 125 years.
A machine almost human, the Iron Chink, cuts off the heads and tails, cleans, and in some cases molds the fish to fit the cans in a jiffy. A machine almost human, a machine almost human.
And then in 1903, Seattle inventor Edmund A. Smith patented a machine that would rapidly clean and dress fish. Unfortunately, he called this invention the Iron Chink. And that is the subject of today's episode. Thank you to History Link for that introduction, cribbing from that. Welcome. I am Alex R. Mayer, your host of the Doomed Planet podcast, and this is episode 130, Seattle's Racist Salmon Gutting Machine. If we can go back further in time to 1792, British Captain George Vancouver was meeting up with the Puget Sound natives, noting that they caught salmon with crude nets and willow sticks. A weir or willow fence, this is from Post Alley at Seattle, was placed across a stream. It diverted the salmon, and then they could be caught with dip nets. And they mostly, again, fired or dried the fish. One method of preservation was pemmican, pulverized and packed tightly into straw-lined baskets. The fish were dried, and Lewis and Clark in 1805, coming out here, said that it was a sight to behold to see the salmon, the streams and bays choked with fish, and the natives, processing them. And again, 1805, this area, the Pacific Northwest, is still mostly pristine, still, the homeland for various aboriginals who had been living here for thousands of years. Of course, that was going to change. Fur trading companies introduced a salting process to preserve the fish. But really, it's the canning of the salmon. And I remember having this as a kid, salmon loaf. You get the canned salmon, and it's got the salmon bones in it, but because of the process, they're toothsome and they're soft. From the South China Morning Post, Chinese built the U.S. salmon canning industry. The Iron Chink invention robbed them of their jobs and insulted their ethnicity to boot, really. The invention of a salmon butchering machine put the final nail in the coffin of Chinese workers who had built up the U.S. fish canning industry. So yeah, you work your ass off in a factory of fish guts, and then you get replaced by a machine. It's very, it's like the Luddites. The Luddites weren't necessarily against this new technology, these looms that were going to replace their jobs. What they were against was the idea that they were not going to share in the wealth of this, and that, the machine didn't bring prosperity to workers. It really just shot the wealth ever upward while reducing the workforce. HistoryLink.org, automated salmon cleaning machine developed in Seattle in 1903, again by Edmund A. Smith. Edmund Smith, the photographs that we have of him, he's a very large man, maybe even obese, and sort of handsome and charming. I think he was like a raconteur and not just a brilliant inventor of shit, but a glad-handing, charmer, right? A schmoozer, a mocker. Smith, with unselfconscious racism, quote unquote, called his invention the Iron Chink. So this was a little slow to catch on at first with canneries, but then It increased their profits, and you could gut and clean salmon 55 times faster than human workers. And again, these Chinese workers were working their asses off. They were going as fast as humanly possible to begin with. And Smith was a small investor in fish canning and brick making ventures. He obsessed over finding a way to automate fish cleaning. And again, it's a double-edged sword. Like, no one wants to gut fish for 12 hours or 15 hours a day, but the machine is going to replace you and you get nothing. According to HistoryLink, Smith had a flash of inspiration, woke up at 3 a.m., shouted to his wife that he had it. He emerged from his workshop 10 days later. Again, cocaine and opium and laudanum was all legal at this time. He might have stocked up if he's going 10 days in a row here in his shop. According to Wikipedia, some historians, probably racist ones, have held that Smith named the Iron Chink due to his regard for Chinese butcher crews. Yeah, I mean, that's, it's a racist slur, and it was back then, even more so, because of hey, can you imagine inviting all these workers over to build your railroads and do all the hard work, and then you have these uprisings and you banish them from your city and kill some of them? So yeah, I'm sure he had regard for these hardworking fish gunners. Who wouldn't? Smith, by the way, is buried at my favorite cemetery, Lakeview Cemetery. He's somewhere next to Bruce Lee and many other Seattle pioneers, as we call the Europeans who came and killed the natives and stole their land. And Smith was filed a patent right away, and you can see that patent application. It's a pretty amazing machine. And there is, I don't know if there are any existing machines with this. I mean, a variation of this machine is still in use. You can see a brass nameplate that says Iron Chink, patent pending. It's just incredible. So you get a whole salmon. It's beheaded. It's definned, it's gutted, and washed. Amazing. If you really want to go to Alaska, and I don't recommend it, it's very boring. There are no people, and it's all just mountains and snow. The Cake Cannery is on the U.S. National Register of Historic Places. Between 1912 and 1977, it was one of many canneries in southeast Alaska producing canned salmon. And, as the story goes, eventually they used up all the salmon by mismanaging the fishery, and it has not come back.
New this morning, in a big policy shift, the Trump administration is cutting ties with a key salmon recovery deal for the Columbia River Basin.
The president calls the plan radical environmentalism, saying it could potentially breach Snake River dams, threatening energy and key industries.
So there was racist living arrangements. There are bunkhouses for Japanese and Filipino workers. Native Americans worked there at first, including children, of course. By the 1930s, very few Native Americans were working there. 4 or 5 fishermen and a few women. The canneries eventually switched to contracted labor, employing workers, as we said earlier, from China, Japan, and then the Philippines. Filipinos have a strong union presence in Seattle, by the way, and that includes a gruesome double murder that happened in the 70s, which maybe we can do a show about. The native village of Cake was 1.5 miles from the cannery, and the natives helped build the cannery. It had 22 buildings. And again, this has been preserved, and it's a National Historic Landmark District. This is on Wikipedia, the race-based division of labor assigned positions of responsibility to white men, lower-level menial tasks to immigrants from China and elsewhere. Native Tlingit people, the Tlingit was the local tribe were employed to catch the fish. So it closed finally in 1977. We love to mine racist old-time newspapers which is all American newspapers of the old days, for the Doomed Planet podcast. Here's from the Ketchikan Miner, July 6, 1907. Salmon canning industry in Alaska and that of the entire Pacific coast is under a great economical revolution brought about by the invention of the Iron Chink, invented by Smith of Seattle. He's now making the rounds of Alaska canneries. We've installed a number of these machines on Puget Sound and in the British Columbia canneries and have nothing but satisfactory reports upon their efficiency and the economy and speed with which they perform their arduous duties. In a conversation with Mr. K.B. Denting, manager of the largest salmon packing plant in the world, the Pacific American Fisheries Company of Bellingham, and Anacortes, told of the experience with the Iron Chink. Mr. Denting was able to make a great cleanup in 1905. 16,000 fish came into the cannery and were run through the 2 Iron Chinks in 2.5 hours. In 1901, the Pacific American Fisheries Company had 10 lines of machinery. Chinese butchers worked in the day and white men at night. The company's high day pack was 8,600 cases. The Iron Chink eventually quadrupled and doubled that output. It is a well-known fact that an expert Chinese butcher cannot handle more than 2,500 fish a day. Can you imagine sitting there gutting 2,500 fish a day? And that's only when the man is in good condition at the beginning of the season and is not overcrowded or tired. As the season advances and he is pressed with work, he gradually falls on account of sore hands and weariness. My God. Mr. Smith predicts that within a short space of time, the Chinese contractor will be a thing of the past. His grounds for making this sweeping assertion are that the Iron Chink, wherever installed, had the effect of abolishing the high-priced Chinese butcher and abolishing the actions of the contractor now that his chain of operation is broken and will no longer profit handsomely, heretofore realized from his practical monopoly of the labor market. I really doubt the Chinese cannery workers were making good money. And then, of course, it's like an employment agency. They're kicking off a percentage back to the contractor. And, at the Alaska-Yukon-Pacific Exposition in 1909, this was kind of a cheerleading for capitalist development of formerly Indian lands. The Olmsted brothers of Massachusetts, already planning some parks and parkways in Seattle, visited in 1906. And they contributed to helping with this fair, as did the Olmsted firm's James Frederick Dawson. The only foreign countries to erect entire buildings at the fair were Japan and Canada. But their presence was enough to validate the Pacific theme. Crowds entered immediately. Military bands from the Army and Navy performed. President Taft from the East Room of the White House sent the signal to open the exposition. 2 days later, again, Edmund A. Smith was on his way to visit the fair, had a horrible car accident. This is when not a lot of people had cars, so he's an early car accident victim. Ran into a pole, and his car burst into flames, so he was burnt alive. Now, I don't think he's totally evil like Dick Cheney or Hitler, but sort of ironic that this guy was burned alive. after being so racist. Speaking of racist, wow, you can't get away from it in the early Pacific Northwest of the early days of the Europeans, or today. There were human exhibits. A month-old orphaned boy named Ernst was raffled away as a prize. Although a winning ticket was drawn, nobody claimed the prize. Other human exhibits included displays of the Igorot people from the Philippines as dog-eating primitive people, and the Alaskan Siberians, Eskimos, and, of course, a Chinese village depicting opium dens. God, premature babies were also displayed in French physician Alexandre Lyon's incubators. Alexandre. Decades before such systems were commonplace in hospitals. This was not unique to the Alaska-Yukon-Pacific Exposition. Babies had been displayed in incubators since the 1896 Berlin Exposition. Wow, I wonder if that was like racist with a hint of coming Nazism and fascism. In 1938, the Imperial Valley Press wrote a bit about the late Edmund Smith. One day, by chance, he went into a cannery where they were canning fish. As he watched the process, an idea hit him like a bumblebee landing on a farm boy's neck. Eureka! I can invent a machine to do that work, he declared, according to this newspaper. Again, we can't fact-check these things too closely. He worked out his invention crudely, and then he showed it, to Edmund S. Doming, president of the Pacific American Fisheries. In order to see him, he had to make an overnight trip by boat from Portland to Bellingham. He couldn't afford a lower berth, so he bought an upper. But how is he going to get his 320 pounds into that upper? Okay, the pictures of him don't look like he weighs 320 pounds, but very tall, a very large man. Why not? He waited until the other man went to bed, then came in, took a hold of the upper berth, and shook it until it creaked and trembled. The man in the lower asked what was the matter. I just want to make sure it's all right, said Iron Chink. Okay, so that's his nickname, is Iron Chink. Too bad he didn't live long enough for people to actually use that as his nickname. The last one broke and let me fall. It don't pay to take chances on shaky berths. So the man in the lower got out immediately. Maybe we better exchange places. I've invented a machine that will open fish, cut off their heads and tails and fins, and clean out the fish. It will do the work of 20 Chinamen.
A mechanical elevator moves them rapidly into the sorting bins in the fish house. A machine almost human, the Iron Chink, cuts off the heads and tails, cleans, and in some cases molds the fish to fit the cans in a jiffy.
Here was a big fat lumbersome man trying to make him invest money in a harebrained idea. Are you a mechanic? No. Have you ever invented anything? No. But he got Mr. Deming to try out his machine. The rest is history, of course. Yes, the bad things happen when you name a machine the Iron Chink. The Alaska Daily Empire, September 2nd, 1916, loses hand in Iron Chink at Taku Harbor. Harold Brown of Portland, Oregon, was brought to Juneau at noon today from Taku Harbor after suffering an accident in which he lost his right hand at the wrist. The young man had been working at Taku during the cannery season, and this morning was feeding fish into the Iron Chink. The sleeve of his jumper caught in the cogs of the machine. The arm was drawn into the machine, and one of the knives severed his hand. Reminds me of a side story. There was one of the early guys working on The Stranger, the Seattle newspaper, who spent a summer on a fishing boat, a factory fishing boat, cruising up in Alaska. I knew a lot of people that did that. And he had long hair, and at one point his hair got sucked into one of these machines right up to where his head was. So he did not get injured. They had to cut his hair off. Automatic fish processing machines are dangerous. Heart attack fatal. From the Evening Star, Washington, D.C., June 1st, 1934. Builder of Seattle's first streetcar line dies at 82. Frank Osgood, 82, who built Seattle's first streetcar line on his arrival here from Boston 50 years ago, died yesterday of a heart attack. Osgood was identified for many years with the development of the Iron Chink, a machine which cleans salmon at the rate of 1 a second. Revolutionized the salmon industry by eliminating the armies of, quote, coolies who wanted to do this work. God, 1934 in a respectable American newspaper in D.C. I guess Frank H. Osgood was businessman somehow associated with Smith or helped capitalize his invention. Okay, I love this one. The Daily Alaska Empire, August 14th, 1930. Offender arrested by distinguished men and held for trial. Literally throwing a monkey wrench into the machinery of the Alaska-Pacific Salmon Corporation's cannery, a cake, James Febentive, Oriental worker who had become dissatisfied with conditions at the plant, compelled suspension of its operations for several hours pending repairs. Possible racial jealousy influenced the Filipino to select for venting his temper that part of the equipment called the Iron Chink. Can you imagine who wrote this? Okay, yeah, racial jealousy. What? The offender was taken into custody by Gilbert W. Skinner, president, and E. Murray, superintendent of the packing company. Okay, and transported to Petersburg, charged with malicious mischief. His bail was fixed at $3,000. Of course, in the United States, we have cash bail. It works really well if you have lots of money. Chink is a slang for Chinaman. I'm just going through a lot of articles here and just sort of getting burned out with the racism. It's not a comedy podcast, it's a history podcast, and that is always going to be a bummer. The Alaska-Yukon-Pacific Exposition of 1909 was followed by the Golden Potlatch Festival in 1911 through 1914, and then 1934 through 1941. Racist cultural appropriation of native culture to celebrate commerce in the Pacific Northwest. That, of course, devolved into what today is known as Seafair, which has hydroplane races, and, of course, the military propaganda outfit, the Blue Angels. You can find out more about Seattle's Golden Potlatch in Doom Planet, episode number 18, Seattle's Racist Golden Potlatch. Edmund A. Smith woke up satisfied. His wife made him 6 fried eggs, half a loaf of toast, and, as today was a special occasion, a dozen oysters. He's on his way to the 1909 Alaska-Yukon-Pacific Exposition. He crammed his giant 320-pound frame into his car, started it up, started speeding toward his destination, hit a telephone pole, and was unfortunately still conscious but trapped in the vehicle as the gas tank exploded, engulfing him in flames, burning him alive over a period of many minutes. Neighbors will always remember the screaming and the smoke that smelled like a barbecue. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back soon with another exciting podcast featuring obituaries for the damned, Seattle history, reviews of rock star biographies, and anything else we can come up with that interests us, as we have done now for 130 episodes since December of 2019. Funnily enough, we have ads now. There's like a pre-roll ad, and I get a message every month. Congratulations, the Doom Planet podcast earned 29 cents this month from ad exposure. So we must be doing something right.
How do you get shirts so clean, Mr. Lee?
Ancient Chinese secret.
My husband, some hotshot. Here's his ancient Chinese secret. New improved Calgon.
Find out more at doomedplanet.com. Goodbye.